They came, they saw, they added their culture to the U.S. melting pot. The Vietnamese American experience. Special coverage straight ahead from the CNN newsroom. Well, the story of America is the story of immigrants. A new exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington will focus on one of the more recent chapters. Exit Saigon, Enter Little Saigon is a look at the Vietnamese refugees who began arriving in the mid-1970s. As a young girl, our own Betty Nguyen was one of those refugees. Tonight, she will host a reception in the exhibit's honor. But first, Betty joins us now from Washington. Good to see you, Betty. This is near and dear to your heart.
Hi there, Fred. It truly is, and this exhibit is really a real source of significance and importance within the Vietnamese American community. And to really understand how important it truly is, you have to look back at our history. You mentioned I was a little girl. In fact, I was just a baby when we fled Vietnam to this country. And ironically, it is war that brought us here, and today we stand very proud as Vietnamese Americans. But let's take a look back first.
America's involvement in Vietnam spanned 2 decades and 5 presidents. It began in the mid-1950s with the fall of France's colonial empire in Indochina. The man who led the fight against France, Ho Chi Minh, ran a communist government in North Vietnam. U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower backed an anti-communist government in South Vietnam. An election that was supposed to unify the country never took place. And in 1960, opponents of the U.S.-backed government in the South formed the National Liberation Front. U.S. officials said it was a front, all right, not for liberation, but for a communist takeover of South Vietnam. They called the NLF the Viet Cong, short for Vietnam Communist. At first, the U.S. response was limited. President John F. Kennedy sent weapons and military advisors. The turning point came in 1964 amid reports of a North Vietnamese attack on 2 U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. Although details of that incident remain murky to this day, Congress responded by giving President Lyndon Johnson broad war powers. The result was a steady increase of U.S. forces in Vietnam and a steady escalation of war protests in America. Many Americans turned against the war in 1968 after the Tet Offensive raised questions about whether the U.S. could win. But it would take 7 more years for U.S. involvement in Vietnam to end completely. Faced with growing anti-war sentiment, President Richard Nixon gradually reduced U.S. troop strength. He hoped that with U.S. aid, the South Vietnamese government could continue to fight on its own. But in April 1975, South Vietnam collapsed. The last U.S. president of the Vietnam War, Gerald Ford, ordered the remaining U.S. troops and other U.S. personnel to leave. The result was a scene of chaos as supporters of the fallen government descended on the U.S. Embassy, pleading to be evacuated. Some tried to climb over the walls in what's been called the largest helicopter evacuation in history. Marine choppers carried thousands of Americans and Vietnamese citizens to aircraft carriers in the South China Sea.
Now, that exodus led to 130,000 Vietnamese American landing on American soil. Today, there are nearly 2 million Vietnamese Americans in the U.S., and one of them is the curator of this exhibit, Dr. Vu Pham, who joins us now. To me, this exhibit really exemplifies what we have done in this country, not only the sacrifices, but also the accomplishments. What does it mean to you?
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Betty.
Sure.
Yeah, I think to me personally, it means 3 areas, which is the challenges that we face as a community, the contributions we've given to America, and the change, how we've changed America, and we've changed what the face of it means to be America, as well as Americans changing us. So we're no longer Vietnamese, we're Vietnamese American.
This is very true. So on top of that, though, you can't put one of these together overnight. What did it take to get to this point?
Oh,
Is this the first of its kind?
Oh, absolutely. So this took, before I even came in, the Vietnamese community fundraised money, and they brought me in, and this took over 2 years to put together, and about a $500,000, and we are continuing to fundraise. We're trying to hit $1 million mark, so we've been doing very well, and it's taken a lot of work coordinating the community.
A lot of hard work, and it's a really amazing exhibit. We got a chance to walk through it just a little bit earlier. I want you to take a look at some of the highlights of this new exhibit.
This is a refugee camp that typically was during the boat person exodus, so actually post 1975. And we tried to replicate a common situation where someone had a very small cot to stay in. They had to hang dry their clothing, and on top of that they might have had a small little wash bin, which is actually behind our display. So they were very sparse environments.
And this really does have a lot of meaning, because we were talking, not only did my family have to go through 3 different refugee camps, so did your family. This is something many Vietnamese Americans have experienced firsthand. This is a part of the history of coming to this country.
Right, and it's so important. And actually, we came through the same camps, right? Camp Pendleton?
Yes, Camp Pendleton.
Yes. So, and what's important, if you start to look over here, maybe if we could back up a little bit, if that's okay. These were actually the refugee camps in the U.S. So or actually more correctly, these are resettlement camps. Camp Pendleton, Fort Chaffee, Fort Indianatown Gap, and Eglin Air Force Base were the 4 in the U.S.
And then we have really a tribute to the boat people, because the sacrifice with the boat people has been so tremendous. Not only were they having to be at sea for so long, a lot of them lost their lives trying to come to this country.
Yes, it's estimated, the estimates vary wildly from the hundreds of thousands to some say close to 2 million died at sea. And here's an actual photo of someone who perished as part of this trip here.
The important. Not only that, but there are many other things featured in this exhibit. Dr. Pham, talk to me about the significance of the people that you featured here.
Oh, sure. And we have some people who have contributed greatly to change the face of America.
We have astronauts. We have professional football players.
The co-author of the Patriot Act. We have the designer of the Ford Mustang, 40th anniversary edition. And we have, for our viewers, you. Actually, the first Vietnamese American news anchor, so we have to. I know you're being modest, but we really want to highlight that, as well as fashion designers that have been worn by celebrities.
And I think that the key to all of this is that if you really think about it, Vietnamese Americans have only been in this country for just a little over 30 years. So to see these accomplishments in such a short amount of time is just something that is a great source of pride within the Vietnamese American community. And we're so excited about this new exhibit, Fred. Not only is it our very own, one that tells our story, but on top of that, it is the first of its kind. And besides being here at the Smithsonian, after it runs through March, it will then tour the country for 3 years. So if you don't get a chance to come up to Washington and see it, you'll get to see it in your town somewhere.
Oh, Betty, it's fascinating, and I know you are being modest, just as Dr. Pham said. You know, you are the first Vietnamese American network anchor, and that's one of the reasons why you're being showcased there. But we also have some great pictures that are also part of the exhibit to help document what your journey, your family's journey was like. Talk us through it.
Yeah, you know, it's really a journey of struggle, and that's one of the words that really comes up a lot, is the struggle, because many Vietnamese Americans, we call them Vietnamese Americans now because that's what we truly are. We stand proudly as Americans, but where we've come from, a time of war, and to come to a new country, an unknown, a new language, a new culture, it's all so different. But in this country, we've really made it our own. And that's why when we talk about the latter part of the exhibit, where you hear the stories of people who have come from really nothing and risen to great areas in any particular field, it's really a source of pride. So it's a great exhibit. There's a lot to see here, and hopefully folks can come on out.
All right, right there at the Smithsonian Institution there in the mall in Washington. Betty Nguyen, thanks so much.
Pawns in the deadly violence in Iraq.